What if, despite our outward diversity, we all have one very innate common thread? What if we really are spiritual beings? And what if that spirit, soul, consciousness, awareness, whatever you want to call it, continues on after physical death? How would that affect the way you live and treat others?
We are part of Source.
There is a higher spirit that's always going to be there for you.
That path that we're all on, and we just have to remember how to get back there.
Let your light shine, be who you are.
I have no doubt that we're spiritual creatures.
I believe in a power greater than myself, a source for all life and all intelligence.
God is throwing a marvelous party, but most people are afraid to show up, let alone dance. What if you really knew that you are a powerful, special, and indestructible being? That you and everyone else are soul-proof? The term soul-proof has a dual meaning. First, proof that you are a soul, and certainly a vast and varied amount of evidence collectively proves that you are an eternal being of energy. But second, soul-proof, just like a watch is shock-proof or waterproof. That's the good news that sets us free. When you really know that your essence is endless, a timeless spirit, you realize you cannot be hurt, you cannot fail, you do not die. That's when you can live the life of your dreams and live the life you have imagined. Let's face it, our experience on earth is not easy at times. Most of us face events such as illness, disease, loved ones dying, financial loss, broken dreams, and heartaches. The good news is that life is a totally safe and magnificent adventure amidst eternity. A large and varied amount of evidence collectively proves that you and everyone else is a spiritual being having a temporary human experience. When you really know this, your life is exponentially transformed for the better. No matter what is going on around you, you can make your life a work of art. You can create the life of your dreams. Let's look at the 9 categories of evidence and 9 benefits that come from deeply knowing your soul nature.
After-death contacts, near-death experiences, miraculous events and divine revelations, scientific input, paranormal experiences, religious and spirituality teachings, perinatal findings, reincarnation evidence, first-hand experience, and other ways of knowing.
The term ADC describes contact involving seeing, hearing, feeling, or otherwise sensing a person who has passed on.
Perhaps the most famous ADC of all takes place in the Bible. All of the Gospels tell of Jesus appearing after his crucifixion to Mary Magdalene and the disciples. General George Patton claims to have received visits from his deceased father, as he told his nephew Fred Ayer Jr., who wrote Patton's memoirs, "Before the colors fade. Father used to come to me in the evenings in my tent and sit down and talk and assure me that I would do all right and act bravely in the battle coming the next day. He was just as real as in his study at home in Lake Vineyard."
She died about 10 years ago. My sister in Louisiana was her executor. And of course, all her precious antiques and the old farmhouse and another farm property, several properties that she had inherited, had passed down to us and were being appraised. Of course, the appraisals were low because of inheritance taxes. Well, they were coming from my sister in Louisiana across the computer, and Julie was sitting at the computer.
I personally had taken the plug out of the phone and into the computer when we set the computer up. So I was the one receiving the email, reading it out loud to everybody, and I said, boy, Grandma's going to be mad about this one. And about that time, that is when the phone started to ring.
All of a sudden, the phone next to the computer began to ring. Well, we all knew that that phone was not even plugged in, The computer was on a dial-up system and it was plugged in and no other phone in the house was ringing.
What we've learned is that after-death communications are very, very common, and at least 60 million Americans have had one or more of these experiences.
Growing up, my grandmother was like my mother. We were very close, and she was very involved in raising us, and we lived with her for many years. She had been in the hospital for a while, and we knew that she was going to be passing pretty soon, and my sister and I decided that we were going to just run the kids quickly over to her house. All of a sudden, I felt a presence there in the car, and it was just in the middle of the car, kind of behind the front seat. And I said, to myself, I said, "This is Grandma," and she basically telepathically said to me, I'm going, I have to go, everything's going to be okay. She just kind of swished out of the front of the car, and she was gone. We then pulled into my sister's driveway, and we got into the house, and the phone rang, and it was my dad, and he said, Grandma has passed away. And my sister and I both looked at each other, and we said, we know. Later on, we compared notes, kind of, and she had felt that Grandma was there in the car also, and had pretty much a similar experience that I had. My daughter also, who was about 8 years old, had said something like, "Grandma's here," when we were driving. That we thought was that, that love that we had, or the love that Grandma had for us. She just wanted to make sure she communicated with us one more time before she went.
The eminent psychiatrist, Carl Jung, related a personal dream ADC in his book, Memories, Dreams, and Reflections. Quote, "6 weeks after his death, my father appeared to me in a dream. It was an unforgettable experience, and it forced me for the first time to think about life after death."
Yes, Rachel was a nurse at a children's hospital, and she committed suicide in 2002. About a year after her death, I had been really worried about her soul. And close to her birthday time, I went to bed, and when she was working, she worked nights. She used to come home, and we both worked nights, and she would come home to visit, and I would wake up, and she would have her face right next to my face. And that's what happened this night. It was like someone turned a light switch on, and the first thing that came to mind was that "You are so beautiful, we've missed you so much." But it was like telepathy. If someone going past my door probably wouldn't have heard anything, but I felt like I said that, and I felt like she understood. And she smiled, and it was like the warmest hug you'll ever get from your child.
These are direct communications because there are no psychics or mediums or other third parties involved. And they are spontaneous communications because the one who's died chooses when, where, and how to contact us.
Well, Lauren was a remarkable little girl. She was happy and outgoing and tremendously empathetic. She was funny. I've gotten a couple of contacts from her since she died about a year ago. And she was quite a little character. She loved the cartoon SpongeBob SquarePants, which anybody who's a parent knows about SpongeBob and Patrick. He's a silly pink starfish. The theme seems to be Butterfly and Patrick the Starfish. And at her eulogy, which I spoke at, which was very hard, but somehow it all of us rose to the occasion. I talked about her love of SpongeBob and Patrick. And about 2 weeks after she passed away, I was really, really grieving seriously. It was a Saturday morning, it was about 7 a.m., and I went in her room, which was we put all her stuff in her room, you know, everything from the funeral, and it was almost like a museum with all her stuff. And I went over to the side of her bed where she had kept all her stuffed animals. And I looked at the bottom of the stuffed animals, and I could see Patrick. She had a Patrick pillow, pink starfish, shaped like a triangle. And I could see his eyes looking out from the bottom of this big stack of animals on top. And for some reason, I was really, really starting to lose it. I reached down through the pile and kind of, you know, knocked all the animals off, roughly pulled Patrick up from the pile and placed him on the bed. And I looked down, and it was like a little toy butterfly, a little purple toy butterfly. And it was placed perfectly right on Patrick, and I didn't see it when I pulled it from the pile. And in my view, Lauren was communicating with me that, hey, Dad, I made it, I'm okay, you know. And but when I looked at the butterfly, I said, gosh, I really hope this is smiling. And I looked, and sure enough, there's this cute little smile on the butterfly. Yeah, she was happy too, because, you know, as a parent, you know, when your child passes away, I mean, I'm not sure I can really articulate how awful it is and the pain that's involved. But that little gesture, it immediately made me feel better. Butterfly, it was significant because when we would take walks and stuff, if we would see a dead animal or a dead bird or something, or a dead frog, she would say, oh, you know, Dad, it's dead. And I'd say, oh, it's okay, you know, the animal is in heaven, and heaven's a cool place, and, you know, we're kind of like the caterpillar, and then when you die, it's like the butterfly. It was a theme, you know, I would say that a couple of times. She definitely changed me for the better, and I think she changed a lot of people for the better. I'm coming home. I'm coming home.
My son, who's quite a large guy, 6'5" in fact, sat with my sister Jacqueline and held her hand and said, Aunt Janah, which is our name for her, you're trying too hard. You need to just relax and let go and get your new body. A few hours after that, he asked her again. He was holding her hand. He said, when you go, Aunt Janah, would you flick the lights? And I said to him, I said, oh my goodness, that is so rude. How can you do that? He's like, well, Mom, I just want her to flick the lights so I know that she is there, that she's aware of us. The morning of the Muslim service, the Muslim prayers were performed by the Imam. We were all, after that, sitting in the room. Her casket was still there. We were sitting in the room talking. Quite a number of people, I think maybe 60 or 80 people were in the room. The lights went off. At that point in time, everyone looked around and thought, well, that's kind of weird. The funeral director came in and looked at the light switch and kind of wiggled it a bit, jiggling it to see, you know, was there some problem. It was later, as my family and I began talking about this whole episode with the Muslim community, that we felt that perhaps my sister Jacqueline Janah Callahan had gained special permission to flick the lights so my son would know that she was there and on her way.
After my husband died in May of 07, I had quite a few experiences. Feelings of the mattress going down as if someone was sitting beside me. Feelings as if someone was pulling the covers up and tucking around my neck. I was alone in the house. All the doors and windows were locked. And I felt two fingers, a thumb and a finger, pinch my backside. I whirled around, totally expecting to see someone, and of course there was no one there. And I said, Bill Pitstick, that has to be you, because nobody else would touch me there. I miss him terribly, but I knew that he dropped in every now and then to check on me and to let me know he still existed and he was watching over me.
We have known for a long time in medicine that a high percentage of people who are bereaved, who've lost someone to death, will, within a certain period of time of the death, have an experience which they regard as seeing and being in the presence of the departed loved one.
In my mind, that she has sent me a message, and it was, the only way to describe it is astonishing.
I think it was easier for me to accept that Grandma had died and that she had gone to a better place. And then also it's made me have a different outlook on, my own death and not be, as afraid or as fearful, and to realize that there is life after death, that she was going somewhere and she was excited about going.
These experiences provide comfort, hope, and healing.
In my view, Lauren was communicating with me that, hey, Dad, I made it. I'm okay.
Well, it gave me peace. I knew she was at peace. I knew she was happy because she smiled.
There are tens of thousands of documented near-death experience cases, NDEs, that have demonstrated a continuation of awareness after death and a rapid journey back into the resuscitated body. NDEs have been reported independently across time in various cultures, a fact that further increases the credibility of this phenomenon. They were first described thousands of years ago, as reported in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and the Aztec Song of the Dead. Their reports of what souls encounter after death also mirror those of other cultures, despite these descriptions having been lost for centuries.
It exudes a feeling of pure love, total acceptance, and universal knowledge begins to pour into you when you're having this experience.
At the age of 18, I was giving birth to my son. They had to do an emergency cesarean. When I was brought to and had my talk with the doctor who delivered, I asked him why he was so concerned during the surgery with my toenail polish. During the surgery, he was yelling and screaming at the nurse because she had not removed my nail polish off my toes. I said, that was another thing. Why did you turn me upside down? I was looking directly at the drain and watching blood go down the drain, and watching you yell at her, and I watched her walk out of the surgery room. That's when the doctor kind of turned pale. And it was after discussing with my mom, finding out that I had been clinically dead.
My experience started with a surgery. I was having a radiological procedure that caused my blood pressure to drop down to nothing. So I left my body, I went into the light. I had a profound transcendental near-death experience in 1994. My own true nature as part of Source. And I always tear up when I get this overwhelming love, compassion. There just are no words to describe the love that our Source has for us. One of the things that I was led to understand during my experience is that we all, every single one of us, is part of Source.
NDEs usually engender more enlightened theological views. Having glimpsed the light, near-death survivors know firsthand that Creator completely and always forgives and understands. They have experienced an immense degree of love and acceptance, and know that the infinite is not vengeful and judgmental. In most NDE cases, people no longer fear external punishment in hell, nor believe any such place exists.
When you have a near-death experience, everything changes. And nothing is the same because you're in this awareness that is much different. You no longer see people as separate. You feel them as yourself.
Usually the first thing mentioned by somebody who's had a near-death experience is a sense of tremendous peace and well-being associated with the onset of this first stage of death. I remember one woman said, if you took the 1,000 best things that ever happened to you in your life and multiplied by 1,000,000, maybe, she said, you can get close to this feeling.
I even told them about some jelly that was on the ceiling. Where they defibrillate you and the jelly, it flew up on the ceiling. They said, you couldn't have seen that. I said, yes, I did. I saw everything. And I described it to them, but it gave me something. It gave me, well, a different aspect as far as life is concerned. I was never afraid of death, ever. But that let me know then that death is not an ending, it's a beginning. It is a tomorrow. Because we all live in today, you need to live in tomorrow. Because we're coming back, some form and some fashion, and our loved ones will be able to communicate with us and we can communicate with them. So we're not really gone, just physically.
My near-death experience occurred in 2001, 4 days after I had had open heart surgery. I woke up, my bedroom was lit in this medium blue or ocean blue light. And around the bottom of the bed were shrouded figures and asked me did I want to go with them. And I thought about it a long time because the experience was euphoric. It was a bliss, a joy, a peace. I said, I don't want to go now. I want to spend more time with Ruth. At that point, the lights went down, the figures disappeared.
But I remember being woken by Ed reaching over and laying his hand on me and saying, no, I want to stay with Ruth. He said, if this is what death and crossing over is like, he said he no longer feared it.
I had my first near-death experience in the early 60s. I had toxemia of pregnancy marked by severe edema, high blood pressure, ultimately ended in convulsions and death. I watched below and I saw Nancy lying on the table and the resuscitation team trying to revive me. The nurse kept pounding on my chest saying, come on back, Nancy. I saw a light coming toward me and I felt like a magnet being pulled toward the light. I wanted to go there. The next conscious recollection I have, I was beginning to have my tactile sensations return. I could feel I was naked, lying on a very cold metal surface. The next thing I could feel was something covering me entirely. So I took my hands as I'm lying there and I thought, oh, this is a sheet. And I pulled it over my head like this, and I'm looking at the lights in the ceiling. I could hear noise in the background over to my left. I turned to my right, and I saw another body on another metal gurney with a sheet covering the body. I turned around this way, and I blacked out. I regained consciousness again in my hospital room after that. My first near-death experience, I was silent. I didn't tell anyone for fear of ridicule. But in 1979, when I was shown what my so-called mission back on this earth would be, to communicate, to share, I knew that opening up and revealing myself fully to others would help others in some way. The light showed me that everything created, everything, has as at its core the underlying light, The light wants us to learn to grow in love, love for all.
Life and death are so much simpler and magnificent than what I was led to believe. And the source is what I call God. And I call it the source because it's the source of our existence, but it's also the source of our energy, our power, our nature. We are part of source.
You can't be afraid of something that doesn't really exist.
Death is not final. It's just a transition.
We all have the light within us. And it is my deepest prayer that I can help someone to realize that they can start learning, growing, sharing, exploring, praying, meditating, anything that will help them to uncover the beautiful life that is waiting for them once they bypass their ego needs.
Miraculous stories engender feelings of peace and faith, a remembrance. They help us reconnect to the recognition that we are first and foremost spiritual beings having a physical experience.
My son had a best friend, Brian, and he committed suicide less than 2 years before Russ was killed. Brian had a little nephew that was only a year old. So Brian's brother was talking to me after Russ died, and he was telling me that his little nephew, which was now 3 years old, could see his grandpa that was dead and his uncle Brian that had died. But he told his Uncle John that there was a guy named Russ with them, and he kept saying that over and over. That affects me more than anything because Russ was very upset when Brian killed himself, and so they're together. It helps me to know that he is in a good place, and that everything will be all right, and I will see him soon.
I've been sewing angels for about 15 years. I have one angel that it says angels dwell here. And I honestly feel, because when people come to our home, they don't want to leave. I do believe angels dwell there, and I'll probably be stitching angels until I can't stitch anymore, because they are beautiful, and I do think that they surround us with their beauty.
I decided one day I would tear down the barn. The hay mow above me in the barn I was taking down had tons and tons of old hay that had been stored there for years. The entire overhead, the hayloft, crashed flat down on the second story where I was. Months later, I looked toward the house, and my wife was running out of the house screaming for me because she assumed I was dead, crushed under all these big timbers. Dust was starting to clear from the barn and everything falling in. And I yelled back at her, "I'm over here." So there's no rational explanation whatsoever of how I made it from deep inside the barn to not only outside, but 50 or 60 feet away, and the time it took 5 or 10 tons of weight to fall 10 feet. So it was really an interesting day.
Millman and Childers also describe numerous other miracles, such as sightings near Cairo, Egypt, of the Lady of Light. This vision, believed to be Mary, mother of Jesus, has been seen by hundreds of thousands of persons. Numerous clear photographs of this moving, glowing figure exist, with detailed testimonials by news reporters, church officials, and people of different faiths. Another human form within a luminous cloud was seen in Fatima, Portugal from 1915 to 1917. This vision, also believed to be a visitation by Mother Mary, was accompanied by a dazzling array of moving colored lights in the sky that were witnessed from miles around. The multitude saw shiny petals fall from the sky that soon melted away. They also smelled sweet fragrances such as roses, while many received, and still do receive, miraculous healings of various injuries and illnesses. There are many who know of the unwavering love of what I like to call furry spirits, those pets of ours who give us unconditional love. They show us that side of life that's both loving and filled with joy and levity. I'd like to share a story with you about Charlotte. I was teaching a yoga class last spring to beginning students, and at the end of every class I like to take them through a meditation, and this week's meditation was called Loving Kindness. You may have heard of it. In a loving kindness meditation, you breathe in, and when you exhale, you send loving kindness out to those you love. And as we did this meditation, Charlotte, my pet, came immediately into mind to me. I drove home. Takes me about an hour to get home. And as I was driving up the hill, in front of the drive, laying at the edge, was Charlotte. And she had been in my mind the whole drive home. I dashed out of the car and I raced over and scooped her up as she took her last breath and exhaled. It was days later when I was thinking about this and looking at the blessings. There's this African proverb that I'm constantly reminded of when things come up in life, and it's called "The blessing lies next to the wound." And so I was trying to think of the blessings in this situation, and I was thinking of that Charlotte indeed somehow waited for me, that she appeared in that meditation at the beginning, and she waited, and she took that last breath when I could pick her up. And the other thing that I thought that was perhaps Charlotte taking that last breath, she was exhaling that loving kindness to me.
I think angels feel very privileged to be here to help support us. And so yeah, I wouldn't leave home without them.
Because I was saved by the speed of love and the power of love.
As the days were getting longer and longer and you start missing them more, or it becomes more real, it was like, I just don't think I can go on. And then these things started happening. So to me, that was closure. The grief isn't as bad.
One of the intentions with this documentary film is to allow for that dialogue to open up, to perhaps dispel some of the fear where people have thought someone's going to think I'm crazy if I share this story, or I must be out of my mind to be seeing this or feeling this. And in actuality, we're not. That veil is quite thin between the world that we think is just the physical and then beyond that veil to the non-physical.
Many esteemed scientists have personally and professionally researched evidence that points to the survival of consciousness after death. Early investigators included Drs. William James, Frederick Myers, J.B. Rhine, and Sir Oliver Lodge. Sir William Crookes, prominent physicist and chemist, invented the Crookes tube, the radiometer, and discovered the element thallium. He and his researchers used strict scientific controls to investigate two prominent psychic mediums. Crookes found these phenomena to be incredible evidence of life after death and concluded, outside our scientific knowledge, there exists a force exercised by intelligence differing from the ordinary intelligence common to mortals.
In an interview with Scientific American, Thomas Edison stated, It is possible to construct an apparatus which will be so delicate that if there are personalities in another existence or sphere who wish to get in touch with us, this apparatus will at least give them a better opportunity. Edison was working on a machine to communicate with spirits, but passed on before it was completed.
We regard that after-death communications, or ADCs, are very much a very valid form of modern-day evidence for life after death.
The first law of thermodynamics, the law of conservation of energy, states that the total amount of energy in a system remains constant. That is, energy cannot be destroyed. It can only be changed from one form to another. Albert Einstein said, "Everyone who is seriously involved in the pursuit of science becomes convinced that a spirit is manifest in the laws of the universe."
It's well known that people on their deathbeds, dying people who do go on to die, very often, just prior to their death, will say something like, "Oh, why, there's Mother," or "There's Grandpa," or whatever. In other words, it seems that at the moment of death, they see apparitions of departed relatives and friends who seem to be there, as it were, to meet them or to help them through this transition. From time to time, physicians, nurses, other people at the bedside of dying patients will say that they have an experience in which they seem to see the person leave the body at the moment of death. Also, I've talked with a number of physicians and nurses and also friends of people who died, relatives of people who died, who tell me that they have undergone what I can only call empathetic near-death experiences. These are experiences in which, for instance, the physician who's resuscitating someone who's very close to them will say that as this person dies and begins to slip into this experience of seeing the tunnel and going out of the body and so on, that the physician himself or herself will begin to experience this, will actually enter into the near-death experience of the dying person.
Max Planck, founder of quantum physics, stated, "Spirit is the original basis of all matter, reality, true existence." Physicist Chester Carlson, inventor of the Xerox machine, received key ideas in his laboratory when he heard voices that explained the principles of making copies. Science magazine reported that Carlson left millions to psychical research because, quote, he felt that science should try to reach into the mystery of survival after death. One particular phase or stage of the near-death experience that lends itself to the possibility of external verification is the out-of-body aspect. People sometimes report unusual perceptions of unlikely objects in improbable locations, things that they would not be expected to see and that they couldn't in fact see by normal means. Wilder Penfield, MD, is widely considered to be the father of neurosurgery and is responsible for much of our current understanding of brain function. Like some of his medical colleagues, Penfield thought for many years that there was no consciousness independent of the brain. However, after 50 years of research, he changed his mind. In his book, Mystery of the Mind, Dr. Penfield stated, "The consciousness of man, the mind, is not something to be reduced to brain mechanism. What a thrill it is, then, to discover that the scientists, too, can legitimately believe in the existence of spirit. Where did the mind, call it the spirit if you like, come from? Who can say? It exists." Willis Harman, Ph.D., author, emeritus professor at Stanford, and founder of the Institute of Noetic Sciences, stated, "There is a tremendous amount of empirical, anecdotal, clinical, and traditional evidence suggesting that, in some sense, the essence of the person survives physical death. As this new view becomes real in our life, fear of death disappears. We couldn't not exist if we wanted to." Nobel laureate George Wald, Ph.D., stated, "Mind has existed always as the matrix, the source and condition of physical reality. That stuff from which physical reality is made is mind stuff." Even though we appear to be standing still, the Earth travels at 66,000 miles per hour, circles the Sun, and rotates on its own axis. There are many other examples proving that all of reality cannot be completely perceived by our five senses. For example, hummingbirds can distinguish between 8 different shades of white that all look the same to humans. A dog can hear sound frequencies, like a dog whistle, that humans can't. Attorney Sidney Freeman examined the evidence for afterlife like a trial lawyer would. To the question, can life after death be scientifically proven, he concluded, yes, and it has been, to a number of those who seriously delved into it, including some of the world's greatest scientists, prominent physicians, psychologists, and professors. All of us will find ourselves in another intriguing new world when our physical bodies expire. Ian Stevenson, MD, head of the University of Virginia Psychiatry Department, authored 12 scholarly books and over 250 scientific articles. Dr. Stevenson spent over 60 years perfecting methods for verifying the past life memories of children. His book, Reincarnation in Biology, presents remarkable evidence for others to study and draw their own conclusions. Melvin Morse, MD, pediatric NDE researcher and author, stated, "It is scientifically respectable to argue that consciousness survives death." Boris Deminovic, MD, DSC, spent decades as a microneurophysiologist researching neural synapses. After his beloved wife, Rosita, died, he reasoned that he could perhaps detect her spiritual energy. He set up thin papers balanced on a stylus in a draft-free environment. The papers only moved when he spoke to his wife and responded to specific requests about direction, starting, and stopping. In addition, while using multiple monitors, some within plexiglass boxes, they moved in opposite directions simultaneously.
It's lovely to have such evidence about the persistence, about the existence of the soul. It's very nice to prove evidence of the existence of your soul at our home, almost 4 years after your death, my beloved Rushka.
In the book Natural Grace, scientist Rupert Sheldrake, PhD, states, "The soul is the animating principle, that which makes living things alive. The soul can be understood as a field of energy or consciousness." In his book, Messages from the Masters, Brian Weiss, MD, stated, "Science and spirituality, long considered antithetical, are coming together. We are confirming what prior mystics knew intuitively. We are all divine beings." As described in his book, The Afterlife Experiments, former Harvard and Yale professor Gary Schwartz, PhD, investigated 5 mediums and their verifiable abilities to communicate with souls of departed people. In repeated studies, he and his team used double-blind research methods in strict accordance with those required for published, peer-reviewed studies. Of the data, Dr. Schwartz states, "The totality of the findings are surprisingly consistent with the concept of life after death and what we call the living soul hypothesis." Aristotle said, "Let us live as though we are immortal." Today, with the collective evidence available, we can more assuredly state, we are immortal. Let us live accordingly.
As a matter of fact, there are several separate medical studies that have been conducted independently that suggest that as many as 2/3 of widows will have the experience of seeing or hearing from their husbands after the husbands have died. But we know from clinical observation that this is true of other bereaved people as well, bereaved siblings, bereaved parents, bereaved children, bereaved friends of the deceased, and that this is a remarkably common human experience.
I came into this as an atheist. I did not believe in God. I did not believe that there was anything after life but ultimate oblivion. And my clients kind of brought me to this kicking and screaming, brought me to the party. And it was only after years of work with them and the consistency of the reports and knowing what I do about hypnosis and doing the work and research myself that has finally brought me to the point today where I can say that I believe in a power greater than myself, a source for all life and all intelligence. So the concept of all this incarnation is to arrive at that state of perfection where we can rejoin, if you will, that source from whence we came.
Writing about his long flight, a pilot said that, quote, ghostly presences guided him and took over when he succumbed to fatigue and sleep. These phantoms, as he described, were transparent, moving, speaking with human voices, and friendly. These emissaries from a spirit world were, said the flyer, like a gathering of family and friends he had known before. This transatlantic solo flight was described in The Spirit of St. Louis by Charles A. Lindbergh.
I have seen auras all my life. I've seen energy around everything all my life. Everybody has an energy field. Everybody has different colors. We all have a chakra system. We all know that. We have 7 chakras. These chakras are all changing, and I'm watching it change. It's beautiful. It's just, this is the most exciting time in my 82 years that I've ever lived.
I could actually see the tweed pattern of his jacket, and I could see he had a cap pulled down and this white hair kind of sticking out, and he was older man. And as I'm kind of marveling about what I'm seeing, he then leans down toward me and opens his mouth as though to speak. And so at that point, that really unnerved me, and I just backed right up into my husband and woke him up. And at that point, I told him the whole story. So it wasn't until the next morning I knew I hadn't told my mother-in-law any of this yet, and I wanted to see what she might pick up independently. So we called her and had her come over.
When I got there, I walked in the door, and immediately I saw this spirit. And so I'd start describing to Sherry that he had on kind of a tweed-looking jacket. His hair was kind of white, kind of sticking out, and this kind of funny hat on. And she's going, "That's what I saw, that's what I saw." And I said, "Well, okay, it's something to do with something in your bedroom." And so she took me back there. And when we got back there, I said, "Oh, it's that armoire you just bought. It belonged to his mother, and he was very close to his mother. Why would a spirit be attached to a piece of furniture?" And I said, "Well, it happens sometime."
A number of years ago, my husband's mother passed away on my birthday, and it was very difficult because she was living in El Salvador at the time. He was devastated. I mean, this is his mother. He's not even able to get to her funeral. And then we started remembering when she had visited us 2 years before, she had told him at that point in time, "I will not let you come to my funeral. It will be too dangerous. You will not come." And he looked around the house, he rolls his eyes and he goes, "Mama Chole," that's what we called her. They said, "Mama Chole, if you really are the one who stopped me from coming to your funeral, please let me know." At that point in time, all the lights in our house went out. And we're both looking at each other. We both run to the window and look out. Every other house on the street is lit. Ours was the only one without electricity. And then just a few moments later, the electricity came back. I think for both of us, we were both very upset. Obviously, you're grieving for someone that you love very much. But here was a real tangible sign for us that she was actually spiritually still with us. She was not only spiritually with us, she was protecting us. She was watching over our family by keeping him safe and out of any kind of danger.
It was very strange. It was the first time I had taken Dottie, after we got married, to my mother's grave. And as we drove into the cemetery, it was out in New York, I pulled up beside the grave, and all of a sudden, all of the latches in the car, windows and doors, started chattering on and off. And I thought the battery was shorted out, and I went and I turned off all the switches, closed and opened the doors. Nothing would stop it. So we finally decided I better get it to a garage, and I pulled away from the grave to go out onto the road outside of the cemetery, and it stopped. And I thought, oh, well, that's good. I guess we can go back to the gravesite. So I turned around to go back to the grave, and they started chattering again. So I took that as being a message from my mother about me and my wife and our marriage.
I also see a lot of entities and a lot of things around people, and I think that helps people to realize, you know, this is real.
Well, I grew up with my parents always telling me a bunch of different stories about their experiences with the paranormal. One summer, I was sleeping in the basement, and for some reason I woke up because right there I see this silhouette of someone, the shadow, and we just stared at each other for what seemed to be forever. And eventually it just floated up through the ceiling. And then once it left, I was completely calm.
Sigmund Freud was a member of the English and American Societies for Psychical Research and stated, "If I had my life to live over again, I should devote myself to psychical research rather than to psychoanalysis."
A few years ago, my ex-boyfriend and I set out to go on a haunted destination vacation. I was laying awake in bed and I saw a woman walking through our bedroom carrying a tray, and she disappeared. She turned around and looked at me, and she disappeared through a doorway in the wall, but there was no doorway there. And she was, like at first when it happened, it's the first time I'd ever really seen anything like that. We had just gone to bed, and we had the lights out, and you could hear like heavy steps around the bed. And they got more and more intense, and it seemed like whoever was like very frantic or angry. We could see there was a gentleman, and he was like kneeling down. I couldn't see what he was doing because his back was to us, but he was in full color. It was a person. And my boyfriend saw him too, and we were like, great, this has got to be somebody who works here. He's back in the bar. He can tell us where to go eat. So we go running down the steps, and like we're talking to him. Like we're asking him questions on our way down the steps. And we get to the bottom of the steps, and he's gone, and the lights are out.
Highly respected figures from Socrates to Edgar Cayce to Helen Keller had personal experiences in contacting departed souls. Seances were reported to have taken place in the Lincoln White House. Psychologist David Thorpe captured the following pictures using different cameras, films, and lighting. Over the years, he has seen hundreds of unexplainable orbs and lights in his photos.
Possibly, as some people say, the veil is thinning, and we're better able to communicate back and forth now than we used to be. And so I call these my spirit pictures.
We moved from Dayton to Columbus in 1980 and moved into a very nice house, and things started happening, and almost right away. And we kind of ignored it and blamed it on...
You could feel the presence.
We kind of ignored it for a while, you know, and saying it was the limbs on the tree, on the house, you know. But eventually, you know, when the toilet started flushing and the washer started washing, or it seemed like it was washing, my husband said, well, here he's at it again. And from then on, he was Harry.
Well, moving in with Mom, it was hectic anyway. So I'm just moving in new, just sold my condo, ready to go. And I moved there, so I'm thinking the same thing. It's a new space. I'm in the lower level, so we're having an earthquake. Every time the bed would shake, or, you know, something's going high in my face. It was just noises and pressures on the bed and, you know, subtle touches. And finally, I went up to Mom and I said, Mom, what is going on around here? And the thing she said to me, she goes, this is one thing I don't have an answer for. And that's where she left me. And then one of my cousins said, oh, you probably have spirits, so take pictures, and that's what we did. And then they came, and they're there, and we love them. I wasn't a ghost hunter, never even gave it a thought. But when it comes knocking at your door, you know, and it wants your attention, it's going to get it.
There's a tremendous peace that comes with being able to open up with the truth.
Well, I think if we had an open mind in other things, like, say, well, as you said, diplomacy, we would get along so much better.
I believe that probably my contact with out-of-body conditions of my awareness have been the most significant things in my life.
Middle Eastern and Hebraic tradition held that sacred teachings must be examined from 3 points of view: the intellectual or literal, the metaphorical, and the universal or mystical.
I was praying, holy, 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 Lord, God of hosts. And being very devout in my prayer. And suddenly I opened my eyes and I was no longer standing at the pew. I was far above the altar where the priest was celebrating Mass, and probably 30 feet in the air. The congregation then began to kneel for the consecration of Mass my physical, corporal body knelt as well, and as I knelt down, I fell back into my body, shall we say. But that was something that was a very powerful experience that I've kept in my heart, and it's remained with me for a long time.
I start every day with just telling God if there's anything that He needs me to do for Him, that I'm willing.
Be still and know I am God.
There was a car accident. Something inside me said to go over there. I go over, and the car that I went to first, the back of it was literally smashed into the back seat. The sheriff got there, and he kind of felt in to see if the woman, which I now know her name is Lorena, if she's alive. And she had no pulse. She was not alive. He told me he's going to have to get the coroner, that he'll just have to have the coroner come and pronounce her dead. By this time, 10, 15 minutes maybe have passed. I reach my hand in. I put my hand on her chest just like this. I just put my hand on her chest. And I say, God, I don't know what you want me to say. I don't know what you want me to do. But in the name of Jesus, do something for Lorena. And her eyes opened and looked at me. And she's looking at me. And I'm looking at her. And I tell the sheriff, I said, hey, she just woke up. He's like, what? What did you do? I'm like, I don't know. But she woke up. And he looked, and she had a pulse.
We are living in a transparent world, and God shines through in every moment, everywhere, in everything. We cannot be without God. It's impossible. Simply impossible.
I'm just an ordinary person that God would take and use me to do extraordinary things.
All of the world's established religions teach the truth of an afterlife. In addition, many native spirituality traditions across time and cultures agree that life continues on after death. Native Americans, for example, viewed life as a day-to-day walk in the woods with great spirit.
All life is sacred. That's common. I don't care what tribe affiliate. Each individual has their own path. They are walking what they call red road. So everything's in a circle, and what I have observed is that there's a respect of the elder, the old, and the young. And the reason for that they say they respect is because they're closest to the Creator, meaning that circle of life of birth, so they're to the Creator very close. And then those who are older and getting ready to walk the path again, walk the circle. The only pain that we take with us is the love that we have refused to receive or give on this red road.
In Prayers of the Cosmos, Neil Douglas Klotz relates varied Aramaic meanings for the first line of the Lord's Prayer. These include, Radiant One, you shine within us. Father, Mother of the Cosmos, you create all that moves in light.
I gave a message to somebody in church a couple years ago, and I told her that I had a spirit here. He had passed over several years earlier. It was her uncle. I described him physically. I described his emotional character, what kind of person he was. And then I told her how he had passed over. And when I got done, she said, no, that's not possible. She said, all of my uncles are still alive. Well, about a week or two later, she came back to church, and she just couldn't wait to tell me. She came up and said, that Sunday I got that reading, I went home, I told my mother about it, and she said, oh, yeah, you had an uncle who died before you were born, and we've just never mentioned him to you. And it turned out she saw photos of him. I described him exactly. When she described what I said about his personality, that was it exactly, and how he died was right on. The biggest blessings I think that come from being able to communicate with spirits to any level is that you are no longer afraid of death. I go to funerals and other people are talking about how much they'll miss the person, and I'm standing there talking to them because they're right there.
In his book, The Light Beyond, Dr. Raymond Moody states, one NDEer I spoke to had been a minister of the fire and brimstone variety. It wasn't infrequent, he said, for him to tell his congregation that if they didn't believe the Bible in a certain way, they would be condemned to hell eternally. When he went through his NDE, he said that the being of light told him not to speak to his congregation like that anymore, but it was done in a non-demanding way. The being just implied that what he was doing was making the lives of his congregation miserable. When this preacher returned to the pulpit, he did so with a message of love, not fear.
Be still and know I am God.
That we do take, that it's important that we walk a good life here, and that we love one another.
What I have learned is that not to be afraid of that life is a journey.
Those would be two of the biggest blessings, to know that you're loved and there's nothing to fear.
Maybe there is something that God wants you to do, that He does have a situation that only you can help.
Perinatal refers to the time just before, during, and after birth. This evidence points to a pre-existence of consciousness that predates birth. In their book, Mindsight, Drs. Ring and Cooper reviewed perinatal research and note an emerging picture of a dual nature of human consciousness. First, there is a brain-based consciousness that develops as the fetus and baby grows. In addition, however, a great deal of empirical evidence points to a transcendent source of consciousness that, quote, predates life and survives death, end quote. David Chamberlain, Ph.D., a pioneer in perinatal studies, states, what is now known about accurate birth and womb recall studies is clearly beyond the scope of brain matter theories. It points to a higher paradigm of intelligence involving consciousness or awareness. The clinical evidence has long pointed to an unpredicted wisdom, understanding, and psychic perception that is outside the brain matter explanations. The most recent evidence, coming from parents' reports, confirm intelligent and purposeful pre-conceptional communication initiated by future babies. These remarkable dialogues, some long before conception, are a new form of evidence revealing human awareness prior to any physicality at all.
I'm a certified clinical hypnotherapist, and one of the services that I offer are natal or perinatal regressions. And what's really interesting about this type of regression is oftentimes when people think of a child in utero, they think of it just as either a lump of tissue multiplying and growing. When we are in the womb, we're actually very aware. We still have our higher awareness, our higher intelligence, because the soul is still connected to this God divine source. What I see a lot in my practice is that people are choosing who they're being born. We pick our parents. We pull in our karmas from past lifetimes that we want to work on, and then we also pick up a lot of our programming or thoughts, feelings, impressions of what make our reality in this lifetime from the natal experience.
Helen Wambach, Ph.D., hypnotically regressed 750 people and had them describe their fetal life. That is, what did they experience in the womb? The existence of two separate but simultaneous sources of awareness was reported by 89% of her subjects. Stan Groff, MD, author of Beyond the Brain, stated, "I've been able to confirm the accuracy of many such reports. Subjects have been able to recognize specificities and anomalies of their fetal position, detailed mechanics of labor, the nature of obstetric interventions, and the particulars of postnatal care." In his book, Babies Remember Birth, David Chamberlain, PhD, describes the case of 3-year-old Jason, who told his mother that he remembered being born. He had heard her crying and was doing everything he could to get out. Jason stated he, quote, remembered something around his neck and throat. In addition, something hurt his head, and he remembered his face had been scratched up. Jason's mother reported that she had never ever spoken to Jason about his birth, but the facts were correct. The umbilical cord was wrapped around his neck, he was monitored with electrodes on his head, and he was pulled out by forceps.
One night in 1994, as I was falling asleep, and I wasn't quite asleep yet, but wasn't really awake anymore, my eyes were closed, and appearing right in front of my closed eyes was the close-up of a little boy's face. And at first he was looking down like he was shy, and then he slowly looked up and he was looking right at me. And I noticed he looked much like I did when I was about 3 years old. And he smiled and he said, "Mommy, I'm coming." So I telepathically asked him, "When are you coming?" And at that point, I was able to see right through his eyes, and then there was just like a blast of bright white light, and I could feel just pure love pouring into me. And I was starting to get really choked up, and at that point the white light turned into like a white number 97. And since this was 1994, I figured, okay, maybe this means he's coming in 1997. So in the weeks that followed, I started telling people about this, and have you ever heard of a child appearing to the parents before they were born? And at first I wasn't getting too much support. People were just saying, oh, that just means new beginnings in your life when you dream about a baby. And I knew that wasn't true. I knew that this was definitely another soul coming from the other side contacting me. So eventually in time, I hooked up with other people, and oh yes, this is very common. And I was meeting parents, both mothers and fathers, saying that their children had appeared to them. Sometimes during pregnancy, but usually even before conception. And so that's when I knew that this was a real event coming into my life, and that I needed to prepare for it.
These babies, when they're in the womb, they are so psychically open and intuitive.
Sarah Hines, in her book Coming from the Light, Spiritual Accounts of Life Before Life, presents over 30 personal stories from parents who describe connections with their children before conception and during pregnancy. Interestingly, such perinatal communications also occur among adoptive parents during the pre-adoptive period. When regressed subjects are able to give accurate, detailed visual impressions of events that occurred while they were in utero, as independently validated by third parties, there can be little doubt that some extra-neurological, extrasensory form of consciousness exists.
It's so perfect how it's set up. You know, when we have karmic lessons, or karma being the law of cause and effect, what is it that I'm learning or processing for God? It's just so fascinating and yet humbling and yet enlightening to think of how far can I pull back the layers of my mind to really become a master of my mind, to create the reality and the lifestyle that I want to live this time around.
Many famous people throughout history have believed in a recurring cycle of life. Reincarnation is a term that recognizes life's ever-changing but never-ending possibilities. Forever is a very long time. These great minds recognize the dynamic nature of life that can manifest in a myriad of ways. Many religions, denominations, and spiritual traditions have a belief in reincarnation. Christian theologian Dr. Leslie Weatherhead stated, "In our Lord's time, it was part of the accepted beliefs of everybody. It was accepted by the Christian Church until 553 AD, when the Council of Constantinople rejected it by a very narrow majority. I am certain that I have been here, as I am now, 1,000 times before, and I hope to return 1,000 times. There is no death, only a change of worlds."
Most of my life, I've had past life memories, not just of one life, but many lives, but especially my last life. My experiences are unusual in this way. There are many of them. I have many past life memories. They're clear and detailed. I remember them all like they happened just moments ago. They're eternal memories. And more important is that I got these when I was 8 years old and 9 years old. But when I grew up, I was easily able to find the town where I had lived in my last lifetime and verify who I was. My near-death experience occurred as a result of a drowning that took place. A near-death experience, they say, in 1962 when I was 8 years old. It was at Glengarry Pool, and I drowned. Not just gulped water, I inhaled it deep into my lungs, and I died. My heart stopped, my lungs stopped. And I was suspended in this infinite light, this clear light that went on forever. And I awakened in soul. I remembered everything. And just as I did, this tremendous avalanche of light, Holy Spirit, poured into me and filled my soul with a great knowing. And I remembered who I was before I came into life, what I'd come to life to do, what we all come to life to do, and how to go about it. My two guardian angels appeared. And they're not angels with wings and halos, and they don't look like Charlton Heston and Elizabeth Taylor. They look like bright stars. They're beautiful beings, and I recognized them. I'd known them for 10,000 years. They were the closest family that I'd ever had. First off, the light never left me, and it became my best friend and teacher. And it taught me the path to heaven, moksha, nirvana, whatever you want to call it. It's a sacred space beyond the mind's knowing. Reincarnation is not separate from the soul's journey to home. It's one and the same. It's one of many gifts that can happen to you as your soul awakens and you take light in and grow and change.
I was a skeptic at first about the whole process of past life regression and working in the life between lives. And what convinced me that it was real and that my patients were telling me everything that had actually happened to them in the past was their consistency of their reports. It didn't matter whether someone came to me who was deeply religious or an atheist or any philosophical persuasion in between. Once I had them in deep hypnosis, they all told me the same thing about the spirit world and about their life between lives.
So I blended in or merged into the rest of my energy. And when that happened, oh my gosh, I got this explosion of all the lifetimes I had lived. It was amazing to me, the richness of lifetimes that I had had.
It is not more surprising to be born twice than once. Everything in nature is resurrection. As far back as I can remember, I have unconsciously referred to the experiences of a previous state of existence.
The initial benefit is no fear. There is no death.
We never stop learning, and we never actually are totally disconnected from the spirit world.
Secretly we spoke, that wise one and me. I said, "Tell me the secrets of the world." He said, "Shh, let silence tell you the secrets of the world."
3 weeks ago, my sister-in-law was very ill, and I had gone to visit with her in the hospital. And we had talked about her dying because she knew she was going to, and I did, and I believe we should talk to people. I don't think we should say to people, "Oh, it's okay, you're going to be all right." They are going to be all right, but they're not going to be in this world. Couldn't sleep at night when I was at home, and so I got up and was walking along out to my deck, and I sat there and I thought, I'll just do my meditation. I'm telling you, it was the most interesting thing. She came along, my sister-in-law came after I walked a while and walked along beside me. And as we walked along, we didn't talk. She never said a word. And it was about 5 o'clock in the morning, and I was just walking along there with my meditation. So I said to her, "Carolyn, if you would just put your hands up like this and say, 'I'm ready,' come and get me. I think we can end this. You can do this." And she said, "Are you coming with me?" I said, "No, not this time, but I will come later." I went back to bed, slept a while, and a few hours later, my brother called, and he said, "I'm calling to tell you that Carolyn died this morning." And I said, "What time?" And he said, 5 o'clock. I thought, my God, that's when I had the meditation, and that's when I saw her. And it was a beautiful experience. It really, really was.
Yes, I had a beautiful German Shepherd, Gabriel, who I got as a puppy about the time I split up with my husband. And he was a great puppy, he was a great friend, but he got sick. He was only 5 years old, and he was losing his appetite, and I took him in for a checkup and didn't think too much of it, and they did some blood work and said they'd call me later. Other than that, they couldn't find anything wrong. And so that evening, Gabe really had low energy, and I was patting him on my bed, and I said, "Gosh, Gabe, I hope you're not seriously ill." I couldn't really imagine. And clear as a bell, I heard in my ear, "His contract is up. He was sent to get you on your feet." And I didn't want to hear that, but I knew it was true. And, I feel like I'm a lucky person. I haven't had a lot of great loss in my life, so, this was hard for our family, especially me. But Gabe was a great friend, and we ended up putting him down about a month later or so. But it's funny that God will talk to you. It's random that I hear things, but I have over time heard certain things. And I didn't want to know that, but you know what? He was giving me a little heads up. Bad news is coming, so buck up. And we were lucky to have him. He was a great friend. He got me out when I was depressed. He got me out. We walked. It was good. It's all good. I feel like I have benefited from these things because they just enhance my faith.
And I love to tell people these things, whether they believe me or not. You know, God is right there. He's very, very close all the time.
Fear knocked on my door. Faith answered. No one was there. Connie Vlack had numerous dream after-death contacts with her friend Pearl and her sister Barbara after they died. These and other precognitive experiences convinced her about the fact of souls and a higher power. Her faith in knowing was invaluable when her son passed on just 3 weeks before this filming.
Friday, June the 20th, my son was killed in a motorcycle accident. It wasn't his bike. He was only on it for 10 minutes. But he hit a guardrail, and he was dead at the scene. But when the phone call came, it was the phone call that I knew I would get. And it's hard to talk about it, but it has made it easier for me what had transpired with my friend Pearl, and another with my sister Barbara, because they both had come to me, and I know that he's in an incredibly wonderful, beautiful place, and I know that the day will come that we'll be together as a family again. And, you know, he may not be here in body, but he will forever live in my heart. Don't be afraid. Do not be afraid, because that you're getting those messages for a reason. And I think that the reason is to help you.
If you knew who walks beside you on the way that you have chosen, fear would be impossible.
With my first child, I noticed probably about 3 to 4 months before he was born, the sparrow kept coming to my window every morning. Wherever I was, waking up in the morning, that little bird would be there. And I'm not sure when I got the sense that it was my child, spirit, coming to me. So I was very curious to see what would happen after the birth of my first child when I came home from the hospital, if the bird would still be there, and he wasn't. And then 5 years later, I was in a different home and everything. I was pregnant with my second child. Same thing started happening. People that you have lost, your loved ones, helps you to realize that they're really not gone, that they're really right there with you all the time. And if you watch for them, they will give you signs.
I've had several after-death contacts from deceased mother-in-law and both my parents, but my mother-in-law came first, and she rang this music box, which my younger daughter had played with, overwound and broke it. So it hadn't rung for, 15 years maybe. And one morning I was alone in the house having breakfast, reading paper, and all of a sudden this music box started to tinkle. About half an hour after that, I got the telephone call that my mother-in-law had passed away the night before. So then I knew it was she who had come. 2 days later, when I was reading her obituary in the paper, same thing happened. She tinkled the music box. I'm here. I'm blessed in that I know there is life after passing.
I became widowed in December of 2001, and for the next several years after that, I had contact from my husband. There was a favorite picture of his in his home office that for many, many, many months was constantly moved. Whenever I left the apartment and I would come back, I would see this picture, and if a picture was perfectly aligned with the wall, I would come home and it would be cockeyed, always typically the same angle that it would be. One day, on a whim, after seeing it moved, I impulsively left the apartment, and before I left the apartment, I tipped the picture the other way in a very dramatic way so that it almost was going to fall off the wall. and said, well, if this is spirit, and particularly if this is you, Bob, you know, I'd like to see what you do with this. You know, why don't you straighten this out for me? And I came home, and the picture had been moved from that angle to another angle completely the other way around. And so for weeks after that, I would play with this picture, and I would have dialogues with him about it, and it became like a joke between us. I realized that maybe simply accepting the experiences as normal allows them to flow ever more so. In other words, now what I read and have heard people say, you know, it's connecting, easily connecting into that universal wisdom.
Imagine, you know, and we've all had challenges, moments that we were not very pleasant, you know, and that's all part of the path. We understand it. So imagine all the things that you've gone through, and for them to give, you know, you're given a choice and you say yes. Imagine the strength it took to say, okay, I'll do it. They say that strength you brought with you, and you may have misplaced it. So when a Native American sees maybe someone who is afflicted or whatever, they don't look at them in sympathy. They look at the admiration and how strong they are. And that's the strength there, and that's a respect.
It is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye.
Now you can make an informed decision about what you believe. What makes the most sense to you? That life is a cruel, random, brief process, and when you die, that's it? Or that life is purposeful, meaningful, lawful, just, and despite outward physical death, continues onward? The collective evidence strongly points to the latter. It indicates that life truly is a totally safe and magnificent adventure amidst eternity. Here are some action steps you can take to more deeply realize what a powerful, unique, and indestructible soul you are.
Can you hear the Sarah sing? And stars with softer murmurings. The falling light the moonbeam brings quakes the earth, silences kings. I grow strong from nothing but the fruit of my suffering. And the snares and toils life may bring are swept away when I breathe the sea. All is well in this land of love, and I long to tell like a seed from a shell. Brother, we'll move mountains.
And by the way, the Soulproof vision is not just about personal transformation. It's about global change, one person at a time. In Boy Scouts, we were taught to always leave a campsite better than when we arrived. And we can do the same thing on Earth as more and more of us know we are souls, identify our soul's missions, and fulfill those missions. Native Americans call it our giveaway, our special talent and gift that only we can share. So thank you for letting your light shine brightly. The world needs you to do that. God bless you all.
What counts in every facet of our life is how we have loved.
I think that this is a beautiful world that we live in, and we shouldn't deny it in any way.
we believe that life and love are eternal.
Use every opportunity you can in this life to awaken your soul.
Spiritually, we're always going to be around.
And I long to tell, like a sea from a shell. Brother, we'll move mountains. You'll lend your hand, and we'll cross the desert. Brave as sand.